The chandelier lights inside the Plaza Hotel shimmered like frozen stars, but Savannah Cole barely noticed them. The moment she stepped into the winter charity gala, every conversation seemed to stop mid-sentence. Her black satin gown, simple but impossibly elegant, caught the glow of the ballroom, as if it belonged there. Yet, what truly stole the room's breath was the man walking beside her. Alexander Reed, the CEO whose signature on a severance letter had ended Brandon Mercer's career just 2 weeks earlier. People whispered before they even realized they were whispering. Savannah? Here? With him? Across the ballroom, Brandon's smug laughter died in his throat. He froze, his hand still resting on the waist of his 24-year-old mistress. Minutes earlier, he had been boasting loudly, loud enough for half the room to hear about how his ex-wife would fade into nothing and how she'd been dead weight he was relieved to cut loose. Reporters had nodded, society wives had smirked, and Brandon had basked in the attention he lived for. But now, his eyes widened with something primal. Fear. Savannah didn't look his way. Not yet. Instead, she walked with a quiet grace, the same grace she carried during the divorce hearings when she said nothing, defended nothing, revealed nothing. Her silence had confused many, but to Brandon it had felt like victory. He believed she had no strength left, no voice, no proof of what he'd done. Tonight, he would learn how wrong he was. Alexander leaned slightly toward her, his voice low, warm. You don't have to face him alone. End of square. Savannah's lips curved into the faintest smile, controlled, steady, nothing like the trembling woman Brandon once abandoned. Because tonight wasn't about revenge. Tonight was about truth stepping out of the shadows. And every single person in that glittering room was seconds away from understanding who Savannah Cole really was. And the first crack in Brandon Mercer's perfect facade was about to appear right there under the lights. Savannah Cole didn't grow up in privilege or comfort. She came from a modest neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio, where her mother worked double shifts as a nurse and her father repaired old cars in a drafty garage behind their small house. Savannah learned early that life didn't hand out blessings, you earned them, one painstaking step at a time. And so she did. By the age of 32, she had fought her way into Manhattan's competitive branding world, carving out a place for herself in conference rooms filled with sharper elbows and louder voices. Her talent wasn't noise, it was precision. She understood people, what they feared, what they trusted, what they wished someone would finally acknowledge. That intuition made her brilliant at her job and quietly admired by colleagues who didn't always say it aloud. But her personal life? That was where the cracks formed. When she married Brandon Mercer 7 years earlier, she thought she had finally found someone who loved the softer parts of her. The parts that still believed in kindness, in partnership, in building a home rather than fighting for territory. Brandon, at first, seemed gentle, charming, supportive. But charm can rot and support can turn into something that looks like ownership. The change came slowly, so slowly she didn't see the trap until the door had closed. Brandon began praising her in public and criticizing her in private. He told her she was lucky to have him, that without him, she'd blend into the wallpaper. He dismissed her promotions as company politics, her exhaustion as drama, her dreams as cute. Then came the worst blow, the whispers from his family that Savannah was the reason they couldn't have a child. Brandon never defended her. In fact, he let the lie grow, even as he knew the truth from his own medical tests. Still, Savannah stayed. Stayed because she believed in vows, in patience, in trying harder when something felt broken. But trying harder only made her smaller. By the time Brandon asked for a divorce, she barely recognized the woman in the mirror, pale, quiet, carrying guilt that wasn't hers. He pressured her to sign quickly, quietly, for appearances. And she did, not because she was weak, but because she was tired. Bone tired. Yet standing in that ballroom tonight, beside Alexander Reed, there was no fatigue in her face. No guilt. No shrinking. There was only a woman rediscovering the strength she'd forgotten she had. And Brandon was about to see just how dangerous a silent woman can be once she remembers her worth. Manhattan had a way of making every victory feel brighter and every heartbreak feel colder. The city never stopped moving, never softened its edges, never waited for anyone to catch up. Savannah Cole experienced all of that firsthand during the months following her divorce. Her small apartment in Brooklyn Heights became both her refuge and her reminder of everything she'd lost. At night, she would sit near the narrow window overlooking the East River, watching the Manhattan skyline shimmer in the distance. The view looked like a promise, one she wasn't sure she still believed in. A half-open MacBook lay beside her most evenings, glowing with unfinished resumes and paused job applications, the cursor blinking like a quiet question. What now, Savannah? The city around her felt impossibly large. Too expensive, too loud, too indifferent. Even the simple act of walking into a coffee shop on Fifth Avenue sometimes felt overwhelming. She'd order a small latte, clutch the warm cup in both hands, and remind herself to breathe. The crowds, the polished floors, the fast-talking employees tapping on iPads, all of it reminded her that she no longer belonged to the world Brandon once flaunted. And yet, Manhattan had always held a strange magic for her. It was in the rhythmic hum of traffic along Park Avenue, the smell of roasted chestnuts drifting from street carts, the slow swirl of snowflakes settling over Central Park in winter. Somewhere beneath the noise, Savannah believed there was still a life for her. Something she could build without permission, without apology. But the pressure didn't stop. Bills piled up. Her former company quietly removed her name from a major project. Some colleagues who once praised her suddenly avoided her. The Mercer family, bruised by scandalous rumors they themselves created, painted Savannah as unstable, difficult, emotional. It spread quickly in circles that mattered. Doors closed quietly, calls went unanswered. Opportunities vanished before she could reach them. Still, Savannah forced herself to keep walking through this city that had witnessed her rise and her unraveling. She refused to disappear, even when fading seemed easier. She visited libraries, worked in quiet corners of cafes, rebuilt her portfolio piece by piece, and every night the same skyline met her outside her window, not judging, not comforting, simply shining. Waiting, because Manhattan had a cruel habit of testing its people before granting them a breakthrough. And Savannah had no idea her breakthrough was already on its way, in the form of a man who watched the city from an office far higher than she had ever imagined. Before Savannah ever stepped into that glittering ballroom, Brandon Mercer had already rewritten their story to suit himself. He always had a talent for performance, something polished on the surface but hollow underneath. To anyone watching from the outside, Brandon looked like the perfect success story. Tall, well-groomed, confident, always wearing suits that fit just a little too well for a man earning just a little too modestly. He had charm, yes, but it was the practiced kind, the kind he used to climb ladders built by other people's efforts. Brandon thrived on impressions. He needed admiration like other people needed oxygen. In meetings, he played the role of the visionary, tossing around big ideas he rarely followed through on. At social events, he was the man who laughed too loudly, shook hands too aggressively, and said names as if he owned them. And when he married Savannah, he treated her accomplishments as accessories, proof that he was powerful enough to choose well. But underneath the tailored confidence was a man who couldn't stand being outshined. Savannah's talent, once a source of pride, became something he felt threatened by. When she won an award at work, he sulked for days. When she earned a higher bonus than he did, he accused her of using people. Then came the lies. Small ones at first, blurring numbers on expense reports, taking credit for her strategies, feeding rumors that she struggled to manage pressure. He wanted to rise, and he didn't care if he stepped on the woman who once stood beside him. The affair wasn't a surprise to anyone who truly knew him. His assistant, Lily Chapman, was young, eager, and too naive to see how Brandon molded people into tools. He used her affection, then used her presence as a weapon, letting Savannah walk into rooms where whispers had already been planted. But what the world didn't know was how far Brandon had gone. He forged Savannah's signature on internal financial documents, hoping to shift the blame if an audit ever surfaced. He whispered to his board that her emotional instability threatened the company's reputation. And in the final months of their marriage, he convinced her she was the reason their home, their life, their future had fallen apart. He thought he had buried the truth deep enough that no one would ever find it. But documents have a way of resurfacing. Lies have a way of unraveling. And guilt has a way of leaving traces in places arrogant men forget to clean. And tonight, under the brilliance of the plaza's chandeliers, Brandon Mercer was about to learn that the past he buried wasn't as dead as he believed. The collapse didn't begin with shouting or accusations. It began in a conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and cold ambition, where Savannah Cole learned how quietly a reputation could be destroyed. She had been called into a meeting with 3 department heads, all wearing the same practiced expression of concern. On the table lay a printed report, pages neatly clipped, her name highlighted in yellow like a warning label. "We're reviewing some financial inconsistencies," one of them said, tapping a paragraph Savannah had never seen before. Lines of numbers. A signature. Her signature, except it wasn't. She stared at it, her heart sinking like a stone thrown into deep water. Brandon's handwriting mimicked hers almost perfectly. She recognized the slant, the tight loops. He'd seen her sign documents for years. He knew exactly how to forge what he needed. "I didn't sign this," she said softly. The meeting grew colder. Outside the glass wall, employees moved through the hallway, unaware that Savannah's career built with late nights, quiet sacrifices, and endless patience was being dismantled behind a closed door. Someone cleared their throat. "For now, we need to remove you from the Aurora Project until the investigation is complete." The Aurora Project, the biggest branding initiative of the year. Her idea, her work, her breakthrough. Savannah felt her pulse in her throat. "Please, this isn't my..." "It's best for the company," the director interrupted. "And for you." The words grazed her pride like a blade. They weren't offering help, they were offering a quiet exit. By noon, the whispers had begun. People glanced at her as she walked back to her desk. Someone closed a door quickly. Another pretended not to see her. The woman she once mentored avoided her eyes entirely. Even the corporate walls seemed to judge her, their glass reflections echoing her humiliation. Then it got worse. That afternoon, Brandon arrived at the office with a performance rehearsed to perfection. He stood in the lobby, speaking to 2 colleagues, his voice low but not low enough. "I tried to help her," he said, shaking his head, "but she's been overwhelmed for months. I think the pressure finally got to her." "Bettina, she forged the documents?" someone asked. He hesitated just long enough to plant doubt. "I don't want to accuse her, but she hasn't been herself." Savannah stood at the top of the stairs, hearing every word as if it were scripted for maximum damage. And Brandon knew she was there. He glanced up, locking eyes with her. A small, triumphant smile touched his lips. In that moment, the man she once loved handed her humiliation to the entire building. But he had no idea that someone else, someone much more powerful, had witnessed the entire scene. The collapse didn't begin with shouting or accusations. It began in a conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and cold ambition, where Savannah Cole learned how quietly a reputation could be destroyed. She had been called into a meeting with 3 department heads, all wearing the same practiced expression of concern. On the table lay a printed report, pages neatly clipped, her name highlighted in yellow like a warning label. "We're reviewing some financial inconsistencies," one of them said, tapping a paragraph Savannah had never seen before. Lines of numbers. A signature. Her signature, except it wasn't. She stared at it, her heart sinking like a stone thrown into deep water. Brandon's handwriting mimicked hers almost perfectly. She recognized the slant, the tight loops. He'd seen her sign documents for years. He knew exactly how to forge what he needed. "I didn't sign this," she said softly. The meeting grew colder. Outside the glass wall, employees moved through the hallway, unaware that Savannah's career built with late nights, quiet sacrifices, and endless patience was being dismantled behind a closed door. Someone cleared their throat. "For now, we need to remove you from the Aurora Project until the investigation is complete." The Aurora Project, the biggest branding initiative of the year. Her idea, her work, her breakthrough. Savannah felt her pulse in her throat. "Please, this isn't my..." "It's best for the company," the director interrupted. "And for you." The words grazed her pride like a blade. They weren't offering help, they were offering a quiet exit. By noon, the whispers had begun. People glanced at her as she walked back to her desk. Someone closed a door quickly. Another pretended not to see her. The woman she once mentored avoided her eyes entirely. Even the corporate walls seemed to judge her, their glass reflections echoing her humiliation. Then it got worse. That afternoon, Brandon arrived at the office with a performance rehearsed to perfection. He stood in the lobby speaking to two colleagues, his voice low but not low enough. "I tried to help her," he said, shaking his head. "But she's been overwhelmed for months. I think the pressure finally got to her. If you tuck Soven, danger." "She forged the documents?" someone asked. He hesitated just long enough to plant doubt. "I don't want to accuse her, but she hasn't been herself." Savannah stood at the top of the stairs, hearing every word as if it were scripted for maximum damage. And Brandon knew she was there. He glanced up, locking eyes with her. A small, triumphant smile touched his lips. In that moment, the man she once loved handed her humiliation to the entire building. But he had no idea that someone else, someone much more powerful, had witnessed the entire scene. That night, Savannah Cole returned to her Brooklyn Heights apartment with footsteps that felt heavier than her own body. The hallway seemed longer, quieter, as if the world itself had pulled back from her. She unlocked the door, stepped into the dim living room, and the silence rushed toward her like a cold wave. No accusations, no explanations. Just the hollow echo of a life she no longer recognized. Her coat slipped from her shoulders and crumpled onto the floor. She didn't pick it up, she barely noticed it. She walked straight to the small kitchen counter, gripping the edge with trembling hands as the reality of the day replayed in sharp, unforgiving pieces. The forged signature, the stolen project, the whispers, Brandon's calculated performance, and worst of all, how easily people believed him. Her breath hitched. For weeks she had held herself together with thin threads of dignity, but tonight the threads snapped. She sank to the floor, pressing a hand to her chest as if she could hold herself in one piece. The tears came slowly at first, then in waves, hot, painful, cleansing. She tried to muffle the sound, instinctively, as though someone might scold her for being too emotional, too dramatic, too much. But there was no one here, only the quiet apartment and the blinking light of her forgotten answering machine. For the first time since the divorce, Savannah allowed herself to break. She thought of her mother in Ohio, who always told her to stand tall, sweet girl, storms pass. But this storm felt endless. She thought of the future she'd planned with Brandon, children she'd dreamed of, vacations they never took, promises he'd broken before she even realized they were fragile. She thought of how hard she had loved, how fiercely she had worked, only to be pushed aside like an afterthought. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a text from an unknown number. She didn't move. Another buzz, then another. Finally, exhausted, she reached for it. Her vision blurred as she unlocked the screen. A message appeared. "Miss Cole, I saw what happened today. You are not to blame. Please contact me when you're ready. A. R. All R. Alexander Reed." The CEO, the man whose eyes had followed the entire confrontation with a look she couldn't decipher, part concern, part calculation, part something else entirely. Savannah's heart stumbled. Why would a man like him care about her humiliation? Her phone buzzed again. One more message. "You deserve better than what was done to you today." Savannah wiped her tears, staring at the words glowing in the darkness. And for the first time in months, something faint, almost like hope, began to stir inside her. Savannah had expected Alexander Reed's message to be nothing more than a polite courtesy, an attempt by a distant CEO to acknowledge an uncomfortable situation he happened to witness. But the next morning, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text. It was a call. She hesitated, staring at the screen. CEOs didn't call people like her. Not directly, not personally. Yet, his name glowed quietly. Alexander Reed. When she answered, his voice was calm, steady, with a kind of warmth she didn't expect from a man who ruled boardrooms. "Miss Cole," he began, "I want you to know yesterday wasn't your failure. It was someone else's manipulation." Savannah swallowed hard. "You don't need to get involved, Mr. Reed. I'm sure you have more important things." "I make time for what matters," he interrupted gently. "And integrity matters." The words landed softly, but carried weight. It was the first time in months someone spoke to her without suspicion, disappointment, or hidden agenda. Something inside her loosened, something she didn't realize had been clenched so tight. Alexander continued, "I've reviewed the internal reports. There are inconsistencies that point away from you. I'd like to discuss this further, if you're willing." Her breath caught. "Discuss? In person?" "Yes. At my office, or somewhere you feel comfortable." A pause. You deserve fairness, Miss Cole, and you haven't been given it. Savannah wasn't used to powerful people offering her fairness. For a moment, she wondered if she was misreading everything, if exhaustion was making her hear kindness where there was none. But then he added, quieter this time. Brandon Mercer's actions have not gone unnoticed. She froze. He knew. Not the whole story, she was sure, but he'd seen enough, and somehow he had sensed the rest. Later that afternoon, Savannah walked into Reed Capitol Tower, nerves buzzing beneath her skin. The lobby's marble floors gleamed under winter light, reflecting a version of her she barely recognized, tentative, yet still standing. Alexander met her in a private conference room overlooking the skyline. He didn't greet her with cold professionalism. Instead, he offered a small nod that felt strangely grounding. Thank you for coming. He studied her for a moment, her tired eyes, her unsure posture, the quiet strength she didn't yet acknowledge in herself. Then he placed a file on the table. I need you to see something, he said. Savannah opened it. Her heart stopped. Emails, signatures, documents Brandon thought he'd buried. Evidence. Enough to tear down his lies, his career, everything. Her hands trembled. How did you find these? She whispered. Alexander held her gaze. Because, Miss Cole, someone needs to stand up for you, and I intend to. Savannah didn't know what she expected after seeing the documents. Shock, maybe, or anger so sharp it stole her breath. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Steadiness. A strange, unfamiliar steadiness that came from the simple truth staring back at her in black ink. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't incompetent. She hadn't imagined Brandon's betrayal. Alexander watched her closely, but not in the way Brandon used to, the way a man watches someone he hopes to manipulate. No, Alexander's gaze was different, more patient, more respectful, as though he understood that Savannah wasn't just reading evidence, she was reclaiming pieces of herself. Why are you showing me this? She asked quietly. Because you deserve to know you were wronged, he replied, and because the company deserves honesty. His tone held no pity, no condescension, just clarity. Savannah looked down at the documents again. If this comes out, Brandon could lose everything. Alexander didn't flinch. He chose that path long before today. His calmness startled her. He wasn't cruel, just unwavering, like a man who made decisions based on principle, not convenience. They spoke for over an hour. Alexander didn't interrupt, didn't rush her, didn't push her toward any conclusion. He simply laid out facts, asked thoughtful questions, and quietly began stitching together the pieces of a truth Savannah never realized he had been observing from afar. When she finally stood to leave, he walked her to the elevator. The winter sunlight caught the edges of his profile, softening his usually sharp expression. You've endured more than you should have, he said as the elevator doors slid open. If you ever need support, even outside company matters, you can reach out. Support. The word felt foreign. No one had offered her that in a long time, not without strings attached. She stepped inside, turning to face him. Thank you, Mr. Reed. Alexander, he corrected, voice low. At least when we're not in the office. Savannah felt warmth bloom along her cheeks. It wasn't romantic, at least not yet. It was recognition. The sense of being seen by someone who didn't want anything from her except the truth. As the elevator descended, she replayed the meeting in her mind, the evidence, the calmness, the way Alexander looked at her as though she wasn't broken, just bruised. And bruises, she knew, could heal. When the doors opened into the lobby, her phone buzzed. A new message. From Brandon. We need to talk. Now. Savannah stared at the screen, her heart tightening, not with fear this time, but with something sharper, clearer. Because now, she finally held the truth. And Brandon had no idea how much danger he was in. Savannah didn't answer Brandon's message, not that day, not that night. Instead, she powered off her phone for the first time in months. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It felt cleansing, as though she were finally pulling the last of his poison out of her bloodstream. The next morning, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, studying the woman, staring back. Her eyes were tired, yes, but beneath the exhaustion was something fiercer than she remembered. A spark she hadn't seen since before the marriage began eroding her piece by piece. She brushed her hair back, tied it into a low knot, and whispered to herself, "No more shrinking." Those words became her quiet vow. Savannah spent the next week rebuilding what Brandon had tried to break. She reached out to past colleagues, the ones who respected her work before the rumors spread. Some were hesitant, but a few responded with genuine warmth. A former client insisted on taking her to lunch, praising the clarity and artistry of her branding strategies. Another asked if she could help with a small project. It wasn't much, but it was a start. At home, she opened her laptop not with dread this time, but with purpose. She refreshed her portfolio, rewriting case studies in her own voice again. She redrafted resumes, crafted proposals, organized evidence Alexander had shown her. Every keystroke felt like reclaiming territory. And for the first time in months, Savannah slept through an entire night. But her transformation wasn't just internal. She bought herself a new coat, nothing extravagant, just a camel wool wrap that made her feel secure and grounded. On a cold Thursday morning, she walked across the Brooklyn Bridge with her coffee, her steps firmer than the week before. She noticed the city again, the way sunlight glinted off skyscrapers, the distant horns, the hum of life she once adored. Manhattan no longer felt like it was pushing her out. It felt like it was waiting for her to catch up. Still, she hadn't responded to Brandon. She didn't need to. She owed him nothing anymore. But fate didn't intend to let things stay quiet. One evening, as Savannah was reviewing a proposal at a small cafe near Central Park, the door opened, and cold winter air rushed in. She looked up, expecting another customer, maybe a student, a tourist, a businessman in a hurry. Instead, Brandon Mercer walked in. His eyes scanned the room and landed on her. He froze. Savannah didn't. She lifted her chin, calm and unshaken. Brandon approached slowly, his expression tight, almost desperate. "Savannah, we need to talk." She closed her laptop gently, because this time, she wasn't the one who had anything to fear. Brandon stood above her table, his breath visible in the cold air still clinging to his coat. Savannah didn't rise. She didn't flinch. She simply folded her hands, calm in a way that unsettled him instantly. "We need to talk," he repeated, his tone softening in a way she recognized too well, his damage control voice. Savannah looked up. "About what? You seemed very sure of yourself at the office." He winced. "Savannah, things got out of hand. I never meant for you to get hurt." "Put mine it." She almost laughed. Hurt? He had dismantled her career, her reputation, her sense of self, and now he spoke as if it were a small misunderstanding at a dinner table. "What do you want, Brandon?" she asked quietly. He sat down without being invited. His eyes darted around the cafe, checking whether anyone was watching. "Someone's digging into my records, asking questions about signatures, about expense reports, someone high up." Savannah held his gaze, unblinking. "Maybe you should answer them." His jaw tightened. "Don't play games with me. You know exactly what I'm talking about." She didn't shift, didn't breathe differently. She had learned that silence unnerved him more than anger ever could. Brandon leaned in. "Savannah, listen, if these documents come out, it'll ruin me. My career, my future, everything. I need you to help me fix this." She blinked, stunned not by the request, but by the audacity. He had dragged her name through the mud, then dared to ask for rescue. "How would I help?" she asked, voice flat. "Tell them the signature was a mistake. Say you signed it quickly and forgot. Say we were under stress." "We?" Savannah echoed. Brandon swallowed. "Look, I know I wasn't perfect, but we both made mistakes. This doesn't have to destroy us." "Us?" The word tasted sour. Savannah leaned back in her chair, studying him. Brandon's face, once so confident, now showed cracks of real fear. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't remorseful. He was cornered. And cornered men only cared about escape. "I'm not covering for you," she said softly. His eyes flared. "If you don't, they'll go after you too." "No," she replied, her calm slicing through his panic. "They've already found the truth." Brandon stiffened. "What truth?" She slipped her laptop into her bag, rising slowly. "The truth you tried so hard to bury." His breath caught. "Savannah, what did you do?" She met his eyes one last time, unbroken. "I finally stopped protecting the wrong person." And as she walked past him, Brandon's phone vibrated violently on the table, an incoming call from an office he had prayed would never call again. Savannah didn't rush home after leaving Brandon in the cafe. Instead, She walked through the chilly evening air of Central Park, letting the cold steadiness quiet her thoughts. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't reacting, she was choosing. Each breath felt like reclaiming a little more space inside herself. Space Brandon had once occupied with criticism and doubt. The next morning, she woke before sunrise. No heaviness, no panic, just a quiet determination. She opened her closet and examined the clothes she had kept for years, most of them chosen to make Brandon comfortable. Soft colors, conservative cuts, nothing that drew too much attention. She realized how much of her life had been shaped around minimizing herself. That ended now. Savannah donated half her wardrobe to a local shelter, keeping only pieces that felt strong and honest. Then she visited a small boutique in Soho. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just a place where the owner greeted her with kindness instead of judgment. She bought a deep navy blazer that fit her shoulders perfectly, a pair of tailored slacks, and a simple silk blouse. Clothing that didn't hide her. Clothing that didn't apologize. At home, she sat at her dining table with a fresh cup of coffee and opened her laptop. This time, she didn't hesitate. She updated her portfolio, removed Brandon's name from projects he'd stolen credit for, and rewrote her personal statement with a clarity she hadn't had in years. Every word she typed felt like returning to the woman she once promised she'd become. By mid-afternoon, she sent her new portfolio to 3 industry contacts, and within an hour, one of them replied, "Your work is exceptional. Let's meet." Savannah exhaled, feeling something warm unfurl in her chest. Hope didn't feel frightening anymore. It felt deserved. Later that day, as the city lights flickered on across Manhattan, she braided her hair loosely and stood before the bathroom mirror again. This time, the woman looking back wasn't tired. She was focused, centered, unapologetically herself. And there was still one more step in her transformation. She picked up her phone and typed a short message to Alexander Reed. "I'm ready to talk about next steps." Before she could set the phone down, it buzzed. His reply came almost instantly. "Come to my office tomorrow morning. I have something to show you." She felt her heartbeat quicken, not with fear, but with anticipation. Because somewhere between the truth he uncovered and the calm he gave her, Alexander had become more than a distant CEO. He had become someone she trusted, someone who saw her, someone who believed she could rise again. And tomorrow, she would learn exactly why he believed that, and why he had chosen to stand beside her long before she realized she needed anyone at all. Brandon Mercer had always believed he could talk his way out of anything. He relied on charm the way other men relied on oxygen. But charm didn't help him when he received the call that morning, the one that made his blood drain faster than ice melting on steel. "Mr. Mercer," the voice on the line said, "we need you to come into the compliance office." Immediately, he froze in his kitchen, the spoon in his cereal bowl clattering against the ceramic. Lily, still wearing one of his shirts, peeked from the hallway, confused by the sudden stiffness in his shoulders. "Everything okay?" she asked. Brandon didn't answer. His mind was racing too fast. Who had talked? Who had seen what? Who had access to the documents he buried so carefully? The meeting was worse than he imagined. 4 compliance officers sat waiting, folders open, faces grim. On the table lay the forged signature, the one he had created so confidently, convinced he'd never be caught. He felt sweat gather beneath his collar. "This isn't what it looks like," Brandon insisted. "Savannah must have." "No," one officer interrupted. "We spoke with Miss Cole. She has provided a timeline, emails, and supporting documents pointing directly to you." "Savannah." His stomach twisted. He had expected her silence, counted on it. He assumed she would stay quiet out of fear, habit, or loyalty. He never considered that she might find her strength again. And certainly not that she'd find someone powerful enough to help her. "What emails?" he demanded, voice cracking. "Copies she received," another answered. "From a third party." A third party? Brandon's mind tripped over the possibilities, but one name rose above all others, the one man he never wanted to cross. Alexander Reed. By the time he was escorted out of the office, quietly but firmly, his vision had narrowed to static. He needed control. He needed leverage. He needed Savannah back under his thumb before Reed crushed him completely. He tried calling her. No answer. He texted. No reply. Lily watched him pace their apartment, worry replacing her usual infatuation. "Brandon, what's going on? You're scaring me." "I need her," he muttered, gripping his hair with both hands. She has something that could destroy me. Lily blinked. Your ex-wife? He didn't confirm it. He didn't need to. Late that afternoon, he stormed out of the building and headed straight to Reed Capital Tower, furious, desperate, unraveling. He didn't know what Savannah had planned. He didn't know how much Alexander knew. He only knew one thing. He was losing control. And Brandon Mercer did not survive without control. He pushed through the revolving doors of the tower, ready to demand answers. But what he found waiting for him inside was far worse than anything he imagined. While Brandon Mercer was unraveling inside Reed Capital Tower, his mistress, Lily Chapman, was experiencing her own slow collapse, one that began the moment his life stopped looking glamorous and started looking unstable. Lily had fallen for Brandon the way naive hearts fall for polished charm, quickly, carelessly, and without understanding the cost. He told her what she wanted to hear, that she was special, different, meant for bigger things than her junior role. He whispered promises over dinners she couldn't afford and trips he charged to company cards. He painted himself as a man trapped in an unhappy marriage, moments away from freeing himself. But now, as she waited in their apartment, she realized she had never asked what he planned to free her from. The man pacing in front of her wasn't the confident executive she met a year ago. He was frantic, sweating, muttering to himself as though the world were collapsing around him. "Brandon," she said carefully, "you're scaring me. What did you do?" He didn't answer. He grabbed papers off the counter, flipped through them, threw them aside. His panic radiated like heat off concrete. "Savannah set me up," he snapped. "She must have gone to Reed. He's pulling strings. He wants me gone." Lily stiffened. "Reed? As in Alexander Reed? The Alexander Reed?" Brandon stopped pacing, breathing hard. "He thinks she's some kind of victim. He's protecting her. And now she holds evidence that could ruin me." Lily's heart pounded. She had known about the financial shortcuts Brandon took. She had even helped him file a few reports, trusting his explanations. But she didn't know he had forged signatures. She didn't know the company could press charges. And suddenly, the apartment she once thought she'd share with him forever felt smaller, dirtier, dangerous. "Did you really forge her name?" she whispered. He whirled toward her. "Don't you dare judge me. You benefited from it too." Her breath caught. That wasn't love. That was a threat. Lily had given up friends, opportunities, even parts of herself to be with Brandon. She had defended him, supported him, believed him. But now she saw him for what he truly was. A man who used people until they broke and blamed them when things fell apart. She stepped back. "Brandon, I can't go down with you." He stared at her, eyes widening as the truth set in. "You're leaving me?" he asked, almost shocked. But Lily didn't answer. She grabbed her coat, her purse, and walked to the door without looking back. When she stepped into the hallway, her phone buzzed. A news alert. A headline. "Internal investigation opens at Mercer & Co. Sources point to senior executive misconduct." She covered her mouth. Because the photo beneath the headline wasn't Savannah. It was Brandon. And Lily realized she hadn't escaped him soon enough. Savannah arrived at Reed Capital Tower the next morning with a mixture of nerves and clarity. The winter wind had brushed color into her cheeks, and the navy blazer she wore felt like new armor. Simple, clean, purposeful. She wasn't sure what Alexander wanted to discuss, but she felt steadier than she had in months. When she stepped into his office, she noticed something she hadn't before: the view. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, morning sunlight spilling across polished floors, casting long gold lines that made the room feel warm despite the winter chill. Alexander stood near the window, hands in his pockets, deep in thought. He turned when he heard her enter. "Savannah," he greeted, his voice carrying that calm steadiness she'd come to rely on. "Thank you for coming." She smiled faintly. "You said you had something to show me." "Tinawi's Forstrex." "I do," he replied, motioning for her to sit. He placed a folder in front of her, not like the last one filled with evidence, but something thinner, more refined. She opened it slowly. Inside was an invitation. Winter Charity Gala. The Plaza Hotel. Guest of honor. Reed Capital's new strategic vision project. Savannah blinked. "I don't understand." Alexander took a seat across from her, leaning forward slightly. "Your portfolio," he said. "Your insight. Your work. It's exceptional, Savannah. You see people in a way most strategists don't. And I want you to lead our new initiative. Her breath caught. Lead? Me? He nodded. I've already reviewed your concepts. And yes, you'll need to present some of them at the gala. It's the most influential event of the season. The right eyes will be watching. Her heart hammered. Alexander, people still associate me with Brandon, with the rumors. His expression softened. Not after this. This project will put your name exactly where it belongs, at the center of your own success. She looked down at the elegant gold embossing on the invitation. Her hands trembled slightly. Why are you doing this for me? Alexander hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but out of careful consideration. Because, he said slowly, I believe in investing in people who have been underestimated. And because you've earned this. The warmth in his voice startled her more than the invitation itself. He stood and added gently, I'll be attending the gala, of course, but I'd prefer not to go alone. He met her eyes. Would you join me professionally, and as someone I deeply respect? Savannah felt her breath still. He wasn't offering her pity. He wasn't offering rescue. He was offering partnership. A place beside him, one she had earned, not borrowed. She closed the folder slowly, her pulse steady and sure. Yes, Alexander, she said. I'll go with you. Azu. His answering smile was small but unmistakably genuine. But neither of them knew. Someone else had already discovered her name on the guest list, someone who would not let that night unfold quietly. Savannah Cole had never prepared for an evening like this, not even on her wedding day. Back then, she dressed herself to fit into someone else's world, to meet expectations, to blend, to be acceptable. But tonight was different. Tonight, she was stepping into a life she had rebuilt with her own hands. The boutique Alexander recommended was tucked away on a quiet street near Fifth Avenue. Elegant, understated, the kind of place where gowns weren't displayed but revealed. The owner, a graceful woman in her 60s, greeted Savannah with a look that understood women who were starting over. You're not here for a dress, she said softly. You're here for the version of yourself you forgot. Quote, everyone. Savannah blinked, surprised by the accuracy. Yes, I suppose I am. The woman smiled and led her into a private fitting room with mirrored walls and warm lights that softened everything. Savannah tried several gowns, beautiful, expensive, impressive, yet none felt like her. They felt like costumes, masks. Then the owner brought out a final dress, deep black satin, cut in a way that was both modest and breathtaking. Simple, but undeniably powerful. The fabric flowed like quiet confidence. This one, the woman whispered, doesn't try to be loud, it lets you speak. When Savannah stepped into it, she felt a shift, not dramatic, just certain. She looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't frightened, or fragile, or apologizing for taking up space. She was focused, beautiful, in a calm, grounded way, ready. Next came her hair, soft waves, swept to one side, and a touch of makeup that highlighted her eyes without hiding her scars, her history, her truth. She chose a pair of understated diamond earrings, the only gift from her mother she had left. They caught the light gently, not showy, but quietly elegant. When she slipped on black heels and wrapped herself in a long evening coat, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. Not to a man, not to a marriage, but to herself. Outside, the city glowed beneath the early evening sky. A car waited Alexander's driver, punctual and composed. As she approached, the driver smiled warmly. Miss Cole, he said, holding the door for her. Mr. Reed asked me to tell you. He's looking forward to this evening. Her heart fluttered, a soft but undeniable warmth spreading through her chest. She stepped inside the car, smoothing her gown as Manhattan's lights blurred past the windows. Somewhere behind those lights, Brandon was spiraling. But tonight was not about him. Tonight was about her rise, her truth, her return. Yet as the car pulled up to the Plaza Hotel, a figure waited near the entrance, someone she did not expect. And the sight of that person nearly stopped her breath. For a moment, Savannah wondered if the winter air had blurred her vision, because standing near the entrance of the Plaza Hotel, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable, was her older brother, Daniel Cole. The same brother who hadn't spoken to her since the divorce. The same man who once believed Brandon's lies more than he believed her truth. He stepped forward, eyes widening as he took in the sight of her gown, her poise, her new quiet confidence. "Savannah," he breathed, "you look different." She held her clutch a little tighter. "What are you doing here, Daniel?" He exhaled, glancing toward the grand doors behind him. "I'm here for work. The firm sponsors part of the gala." A pause. "But I also needed to see you." "It's now." She felt an old ache flicker in her chest. The last time they spoke, he told her she was overreacting about Brandon, told her she needed to try harder to save her marriage, told her that family doesn't quit. But she didn't quit. She survived. Daniel shifted, guilt pooling in his eyes. "I heard about the investigation and the forged documents. Savannah, I didn't know. I should have believed you." She swallowed. The apology she once begged for came now unexpected, painful, late. "It's okay," she said softly. "You weren't the only one." Before Daniel could respond, the car door on the other side opened. Alexander Reed stepped out, adjusting his cufflinks. Even in the cold, he radiated a warmth that steadied her heartbeat. When he saw Daniel, he paused, then walked toward them with the composed confidence of a man accustomed to navigating high-stakes rooms. "Miss Cole," he greeted, his voice low. "You look remarkable." Daniel's brows lifted. "This is your date?" Savannah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "My guest," she corrected gently. Alexander extended a hand to Daniel. "Alexander Reed." Daniel blinked. "The CEO? Wow. I didn't realize Savannah was." He stopped before finishing, but the implication hung in the air. Savannah straightened. "I'm here for work, Daniel, not as anyone's accessory." Alexander glanced at her with quiet admiration, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. Inside the hotel, music drifted through the open doors, piano notes floating like warm light. Jewel-toned gowns swept across marble floors. Photographers flashed cameras. Crystal chandeliers glittered with almost theatrical brilliance. This was no ordinary gala. This was a battlefield dressed in elegance. Alexander offered his arm. "Shall we?" Savannah inhaled. This was the moment she stepped fully into her new life. But as they crossed the threshold, a reporter rushed forward, holding up a phone displaying a breaking news alert. "Miss Cole," she said breathlessly, "do you have a comment about Brandon Mercer being escorted out of Reed Capitol Tower this afternoon?" Savannah froze. Alexander stopped beside her, and Daniel turned pale, because the night was no longer just glamorous. It had just become explosive. For a heartbeat, the ballroom felt suspended, like the chandeliers themselves were holding their breath. The reporter's question cut through the music, slicing the air with a precision no violin could match. Savannah didn't answer. She couldn't. "Brandon, escorted out." The words echoed inside her like a distant thunder rolling closer. Beside her, Daniel shifted uncomfortably, torn between protective instinct and guilt he still hadn't shaken. Alexander, however, remained perfectly still, shoulders squared, expression unreadable, eyes focused solely on Savannah. The reporter waited, her phone lifted, the screen still glowing with the headline. A small crowd began to gather, sensing a story rising like heat from the marble floors. Savannah inhaled slowly, steadying herself. "I don't have a comment at this time." Polite, controlled, unshakable. Alexander stepped forward, subtly shielding her from the lens. "This event is not the place for speculation," he said firmly. "I suggest directing questions to our communications team." There was power in his tone, quiet but unmistakable. The reporter backed away, and murmurs rippled through the ballroom like a spreading tide. As they moved deeper inside, Savannah felt every pair of eyes trailing her. Women admired her gown. Men whispered about her poise. Executives whispered to their spouses about the rumor unfolding in real time. Somewhere across the room, she heard her own name wrapped in astonishment, like people were finally realizing they had underestimated her. Alexander leaned toward her. "Are you all right?" She nodded. "Yes, just surprised." "Good," he murmured, "because surprises are only dangerous when you're not prepared for them. And tonight, Savannah, you are more prepared than you know." His confidence in her felt like a warm coat draped over her shoulders. As they entered the grand ballroom, the scale of the event struck her fully. Crystal chandeliers spilled golden light across mirror-polished floors. A string quartet played softly from a raised platform. Senators, CEOs, journalists, philanthropists, all dressed in the richest fabrics, mingled in glittering clusters. It was a world Brandon always wanted to dominate, a world he insisted she didn't belong to. Yet, here she was, not as someone's wife, not as someone's shadow, but as a woman rising on her own terms. And those who once whispered about her with pity now whispered with awe. Daniel leaned close. "Savannah? People can see the change in you." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Because across the room, a new wave of gasps suddenly erupted, sharper, louder, unmistakably shocked. Savannah turned instinctively. And there, at the entrance, stood a man she prayed she wouldn't see tonight. Brandon Mercer. Disheveled. Furious. Eyes locked solely on her. And he wasn't alone. Brandon's presence hit the ballroom like a sudden cold wind. Conversations faltered, glasses paused midair, and more than one guest turned their head to confirm the spectacle unfolding at the entrance. His tuxedo was wrinkled, his tie crooked, his expression a mix of fury and desperation, a man stripped of the image he depended on to breathe. But what startled the crowd even more was the woman beside him, Lily Chapman. Her eyes were red from crying, her steps reluctant, as though she'd been dragged there, not escorted. They looked nothing like the polished couple Brandon once tried to present to the world. They looked like a disaster waiting to spill. Savannah felt Alexander tense beside her, not protectively, strategically, like a man preparing to intercept a fire before it reached the room. Brandon broke through the crowd, ignoring the shocked whispers that trailed his steps. His gaze stayed locked on Savannah, blazing with something unhinged. "You," he snarled, stopping a few feet from her. "You did this to me." Savannah lifted her chin, steady. "I didn't expose anything that wasn't already true." Lily grabbed Brandon's arm. "Brandon, stop, please. Not here." He jerked away. "You stay out of this." Alexander stepped forward then, positioning himself subtly but unmistakably between Savannah and Brandon. His voice remained calm, but steel threaded through every syllable. "Mr. Mercer, this is not the place." Brandon laughed, a sharp, broken sound. "Of course you'd say that. You've been waiting for this, haven't you? Taking everything from me. My job, my reputation, my wife." Savannah answered quietly, "I'm not your wife." The ballroom inhaled collectively. Brandon pointed at her, hand shaking. "You think you can waltz in here with him and pretend you're some kind of saint? You ruined my life." "No," Alexander replied, his tone darkening. "You ruined your own life the moment you forged her signature." A ripple of gasps swept the room. Brandon's face drained of color. You have no proof." "We do," Alexander said, "and the compliance board has already begun reviewing it." Lily's knees buckled. She clutched a nearby chair, whispering, "Oh God." Brandon turned on her. "You told them?" "I didn't," Lily cried. "I didn't say anything, I swear." "But they already knew, Brandon. They already had the documents." Brandon staggered as if the ground itself had tilted beneath him. Savannah's voice was soft but unshakable. "You lied. You hurt people. And now the truth is catching up." He looked at her, a man drowning. "Savannah, don't do this. Don't let him turn you against me." End quote. Before she could respond, a deep voice echoed across the ballroom speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that security please come to the main floor." The spotlight swung. 2 security officers approached, and they walked straight toward Brandon Mercer. The ballroom fell into near silence as the 2 security officers approached Brandon Mercer. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note, leaving the room filled only with the rustling of gowns and the low hum of whispered disbelief. Brandon stumbled backward, hands raised as if he could hold back the inevitable. "You can't do this. This is a misunderstanding. This is all her fault." He jabbed a trembling finger toward Savannah. Savannah didn't flinch. For the first time since the divorce, she felt no fear, no guilt, no shame, only truth finally stepping into the light. Alexander's voice cut through the chaos like a clean blade. "Mr. Mercer, Reed Capital has formally suspended your credentials pending a full investigation. You were informed of this earlier today." Brandon spat. "You set me up." Alexander didn't bother responding. His silence was answer enough. Security reached Brandon, placing a firm hand on his arm. Gasps spread like ripples across a pond. Savannah stepped forward, not out of pity, but clarity. "Brandon," she said, her voice steady enough to still parts of the room, "I didn't ruin your life. You did that all on your own. what you forged, what you lied about, those choices were yours, not mine. Her words echoed with quiet conviction. Women in the crowd nodded subtly. Men shifted, uncomfortable with the reflection of their own past shortcuts. For once, Savannah wasn't invisible. She wasn't a rumor. She wasn't a victim. She was a woman standing in her truth. Brandon's face twisted. You owed me loyalty. Savannah met his eyes without blinking. You demanded silence, not loyalty. And I finally stopped giving you both. A murmur of approval swept the ballroom. Lily, trembling beside him, whispered, Brandon, they have everything. They're not lying. He snapped. You're useless too. Gasps. Someone covered their mouth. Even Daniel stiffened in disgust. Savannah spoke gently, addressing Lily. You don't have to stay with him. None of us did. Tears filled Lily's eyes. She stepped back, shaking her head at Brandon. I'm done. I guess that was the final crack. Security guided Brandon toward the exit as he shouted empty threats, his voice growing smaller with each step until the doors closed behind him, sealing his downfall. The ballroom released a collective breath. Alexander turned to Savannah. You handled that with remarkable grace. She exhaled softly. I didn't do it for him. I did it for myself. Alexander's expression warmed quiet, deep, admiring. Daniel approached next, pride and remorse mingling in his eyes. Savannah, I'm proud of you, truly. For the first time in years, she believed the words. The lights dimmed, signaling the next portion of the gala, the keynote presentation. Alexander offered his arm once more. Ready? Savannah nodded. More than ever. But as they walked toward the stage, a staff member hurried up to them, breathless. Mr. Reed, Miss Cole, there's something you need to see backstage. Right now. Savannah and Alexander exchanged a startled glance. Because the night wasn't finished. Not yet. Backstage, the noise from the ballroom dimmed into a distant hum. The staff member led Savannah and Alexander to a small monitor room where several live feeds from the gala were displayed. One screen showed Brandon being escorted out onto the snowy sidewalk, cameras flashing as reporters swarmed. Another showed Lily giving a quiet statement to security, confirming Brandon's misconduct. But it was the third screen that made Savannah inhale sharply. It displayed the official announcement from Reed Capital's board. Her name, her title, her future. Effective immediately, the statement read. Savannah Cole is appointed Director of Strategic Brand Vision for Reed Capital. Her knees nearly buckled. Alexander, this can't be. He stepped closer, his expression soft but unwavering. You earned this long before today. The board simply needed to see what I've seen in you for weeks. I resonate. She pressed a hand to her chest as tears filled her eyes, not tears of pain this time, but of release. The weight of humiliation, loss, betrayal, lifted as though the universe finally exhaled with her. Alexander offered her a handkerchief, but his voice held something deeper than professionalism. Savannah, you didn't just survive what happened, you rebuilt yourself, and now the world can see you clearly. She laughed softly, wiping her tears. It feels unreal. Anyway, it's real, he replied gently, and so is this. He reached into his jacket and removed a small velvet box, simple, elegant, nothing flashy. Savannah's breath caught as he opened it. Inside was a delicate ring, a thin gold band with a single diamond, quiet, graceful, unmistakably meaningful. I don't want to rush your heart, Alexander said softly, but I want you to know what I feel and what I hope for. These past weeks showed me the strength and kindness inside you. Savannah, would you consider building a future with me? Not a demand, not an expectation, an invitation. Savannah felt her entire journey from heartbreak to rebirth gather in her chest like a rising light. Brandon's lies no longer defined her. Her fear no longer held her. Her silence no longer trapped her. She reached for Alexander's hand. Yes, she whispered, I will. The relief in his eyes was profound, warm, grounding. He placed the ring on her finger gently, reverently. When they returned to the ballroom, applause erupted not for Brandon, not for scandal, but for Savannah Cole, a woman who lost everything, rose again, and finally stepped into the life she deserved. As Alexander guided her forward, Savannah felt steady, whole, honored. The chandeliers glowed brighter, the music swelled, and Manhattan shimmered beyond the windows. Her story was no longer one of silence, but triumph. And Brandon Mercer, now facing legal charges and public disgrace, became nothing more than the consequence of his own choices. Savannah Cole's new life had begun. Fully, finally, completely. And just like that, our story reaches its end. But you're still here, aren't you? If you're listening right now, it means something in Savannah's journey touched your heart in a way you maybe didn't expect. And that matters, because her story isn't just fiction, it's a mirror. A reminder that we all break, we all fall, and we all rise again, piece by piece. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "What stands in the way becomes the way." Savannah didn't choose her suffering, but she chose what to do with it. She chose to rebuild, to step into her worth, to stop apologizing for existing. And that is something each of us can carry into our own lives. The idea that healing is not loud. Sometimes it's quiet, steady, and deeply personal. If her journey made you feel seen, even for a moment, then stay with us. Like this video, share it with someone who might need courage today, and subscribe so you don't walk this path alone. Our stories continue, yours, mine, all of ours. And remember, you are allowed to begin again, and you are stronger than you think.